Good morning. Today is Saturday. It is April 30th. It is about probably 30 minutes earlier than I'd normally be doing this, just because I got an early start to some other stuff. We're going to start the video on a sour note, because it would be nice if, God forbid, like during the week when it's all nice weather, now it's raining. So it's going to be one of those videos. And allergies suck, and I actually have a little bit of a confession. I actually thought that I was going to be up in Vermont this week, but I was a week ahead of myself. Again, like I said, the last time I actually did do a video up there, they the Forestry Service specifically has closed the roads in until Monday, so I'm kind of hosed on that. So we're going to be down here today trying to think of things that are on my mind relating to the actual subject, and we will do that as it comes. We have a few, but let's cover that as we get there. I will get going. We're going to take a look around for sign. Got loose, wet leaf litter, so I don't know how well that's going to work, but yeah, let's go and see what we find today. Thanks. Okay, so we're going to probably be serenaded by a litany of woodpeckers today. As you can see, last time we were here, this was all snow. The scenery has changed a little bit since last time. Spring has sprung, it is April, and all the rain has made things sprout, so we have all this greenery coming in. My allergies have been more than happy to accommodate such things. Specifically, my eyes have been on fire for the last 2 to 3 weeks. There's a couple of interesting bird sounds over there coming from something. I don't know if that's a woodpecker or what that is. I had woodpeckers over there, though. So as far as ranty banter for the day, which seems to have become a normal segment of the program, if we're calling it that, I kind of have to scold the Tall Ones podcast a little bit this week, because I mean, it keeps coming back around, but if you keep giving it airtime, that's how it keeps coming back around. But of all things that came around and got dusted off as a way of an old chestnut this week, we have all charming things. The Melba Ketchum DNA study, which was a farce the first time. So for anyone who is out there in Bigfoot land that is going to attempt to endorse this and say you're not even giving it a chance, it's been done. This woman in the past, let's review for a moment, is not a geneticist. She is a veterinarian. Not exactly the same level of expertise. Just because she knows what the butt end of a fucking cat looks like does not mean she knows what the DNA makeup of it is. Number one. Number two, when she couldn't get her so-called study planted in a legitimate freaking science journal, she actually published her own, God bless her heart. And sadly, that's not how science does things sciencey. Granted, there is a gateway mechanism for scientific papers to be published, but the way she did it is a complete farce, and it was basically a hoax. So you heard it here first. Melba Ketchum, hoaxer. Suck it up. The people endorsing this lovely lady, let's see, you've got Polites, who is a huckster in his own right. I believe Scott Carpenter's on board with her. He's an outright loon. And let's not forget to threaten me with a lawsuit or something, because you did that with, Mark Zaski did that with the Tall Ones, and I think it was Thinker Thunker who threatened to do the same thing with Steve Kulls. I see some brand new friggin' beaver activity over here. The messed up thing is you'll see all this beaver activity, but you won't ever see the damn beaver. Never figured that out. Or is that just a break? Nope, that's got some beaver aided. Hold on. The tip is a break, but the rest of it not so much. You can see out, if you can see the, hold on. If you can see the water, it's kind of, you can see how it's, the rain is kind enough to pick up as I'm out here, so. So I like to test to know that the zoom is working. Yeah, so that popped up again, and this is one of the things about Bigfooting that in the long-term observation that I have the ability to make, having been around for some time, as I just heard something off in the woods. Hold on. Not so much that I suspect Bigfoot, but it is warmer out, and you do have bears in the neighborhood. So the first thing I had to do to scold myself is I almost forgot my bear mace today. You do in this immediate neighborhood have at least 5 or 6 different black bears I'm aware of, so. The possibility of a bear encounter in the undergrowth here is very real. I'm not overly afraid of them, but you should respect them and be aware of where they are so you avoid accidental confrontations with them. Some are, of course, friendlier than others. And if you wanted to recenter yourself, that would be spectacular. Yeah, the big thing that bugs me about long-term observations in the Bigfoot world is I know you constantly get a fresh wave of noobs that come in and they redust off all the same bullshit we've already covered. But it does get old. And in this case, you know, it's like Ketchum, and then you're going to have the Jacobs bear come back. And yes, BFRO people, it was a bear. Just because Matt Monkeyfucker says that it isn't doesn't mean that it isn't. It's a friggin' bear with a mange. It's not a freaking chimpanzee like some idiots have said. And yeah, I've seen every single attempt to try to anatomically prove it's not a bear. But here's the weird thing about bears. They can go into all kinds of weird, silly poses and freaking prove you wrong. And it's a bear. So shut up. It's a friggin' bear at a bear baiting station with other bears. We're done here. Ketchum, cat vet with no genetics expertise, and yet she's out there, and at some point she was going into angel DNA nonsense. So, if the, and of course now Paulides is, I guess Bigfoot wasn't paying the bills for his book sale, so he has since, I guess, he's joined MUFON and become kind of an advocate that maybe aliens are taking people out of the national parks. So there's that. Oh, I was talking to Lady K one time, and she helped me recall, actually, for a brief story time, there was one incident where I was missing time at one point, and I can't really account for where it went, so who knows, maybe I was taken. Although I would like to think I'd remember such a thing. I would prefer to think that they being advanced aliens would have better things to do than take me up in the lab to play with me, because I'd rather not have the experience if it's all the same. I'm trying to stay under the trees and minimize the camera moisture factor because after a while this camera does get temperamental when it gets wet, as do most complicated electronics. Yeah, so it's like, I know that the Tall Ones is trying to be diplomatic in his titles of his videos, but I kind of have to draw, I kind of call him out every now and then, because he's like, the trouble with Melba Ketchum's credibility. When did she ever have credibility? She's a cat vet who, like, is into angel DNA and weirdness, and you got, you know, Dave Paulides, who is, like, interjecting himself into missing persons cases where you got, like, real people and real family members wanting their family members found, and you're telling them, hey, maybe they got sucked into an interdimensional portal. You'll never see them again. That helps. Thanks, Dave. I know for a fact one particular story. I did actually buy one of his books and waste my money, but it's my money to waste, so shut up. And I got the 411 book for the Northeast, because there are a couple of stories in there I have direct historical knowledge of, being a native of that region. And if you actually read the historical is the missing case of a college girl from, it's interesting how much help they got who went missing up in Vermont from my home state, because apparently they didn't have a lot in the way of a state police back then. And it helps you appreciate just how rural a state that Vermont was back then, still is today. Point for another day, though. And the one suspect in this situation was a truck driver who had been fighting with his wife, and the prevailing theory, as much as they have one, is that he probably murdered her in a fit of rage or something. Excuse me. And along comes Dave, and he has his version, and in his version, of course, he has to interject a little thing where way off in the distance, where there's a swamp way out in the woods, there might have been a young woman heard screaming, because you know Bigfoot's out there. And here's the thing, about 3 years ago that would have been true. There was a family group of 3 of them. And if you piece together things I allude to in some of my videos, you'd know that. They seem to have since moved on, though, unless they rear their head this year. During the COVID period, weirdly enough, they didn't. I'm going to touch on that in a minute, too. Some COVID-related Bigfoot nonsense. And, you know, it's the point that I make with Dave. He always interjects this one little thing that was not part of the original story, just to, like, whet the appetite or the imagination, to allude to the fact that something paranormally, weirdly, Bigfooty, alien-ishness occurred to, you know. And as far as alluding to any chance that I might have been taken by aliens, I am not doing so. I will say this, though. If that is what happened, however unlikely it might be, they put me back. I am none the worse for wear, and if they have some implant in there where they're watching my activities, I must bore the living shit out of them. I hardly believe that. I mean, if you see me sitting there watching my computer screen at work all day, I must bore the crap out of you guys. Sorry, aliens. Lovely shot of the pond. Where were we going with... Ah, yes, COVID, Bigfoot. Our criticisms draw us back to the coalition of critical nonsense in Bigfooting and malignant narcissism. And one of their members, a Mr. Hentges, last year at some point had gone on a podcast while inebriated. Always a winning thing, and I've suddenly cornered myself in this tree. Let me get around this and get out of here. Keep moving. He went on this podcast and he made up this story where he was talking about how Bigfoot can get COVID. And then once he sobered up, keyword sobered up, our buddy basically came back and admitted the whole thing was something he made up. As in a hoax. So we have, bear with me, I have to, any camera related nonsense, sorry about that. So you have these critical thinkers out there, you know, by which I mean malignant narcissists, and they're sheltering a known hoaxer. How's that working for you, credibility-wise? You'll criticize Steve Culls. You'll criticize anyone that who basically has the audacity to disagree with you. Here's a weird, cool, weird-shaped tree, just for the sake of saying, hey, look at that weird-ass tree. And here you have amongst your numbers a guy who, frankly, I've personally blocked on Facebook now 17 times. That's not a 7, that's not a 1, that's a 1 following a 7. 17 fucking times, pardon my French. That's a lot of times. He has these sock puppet accounts, and for somebody unfamiliar with the word sock puppet, it's basically a fake account that's not your own name. And the funny thing is, it's like one of these things that people that have been in Bigfooting for a long time seem to think is like the cardinal sin of things to do online, and yet every single fucking one of them, pardon my French yet again, has done it as well. Why do they do it? Because they're so insecure and so thin-skinned, they have to monitor any mention of their name anywhere they don't have access, because their shenanigans have gotten them banned from whatever forum has banned them. So yes, basically Bigfooting is in some ways immature, and for babies, Lord knows I've had certain individuals demonstrate their thin skin, one of whom was also another endorser at one time of the Melba Star. Like, well, let's not rule it out. Just like, dude, it's a goddamn vet who proposes freaking preposterous nonsense. Shut up. If you allow for everything, you actually have the interesting stuff get lost in the white noise. There's yet another weird-ass tree. That's why I like this stretch of forest. Let's have a look at that. Just go right on up that weird, shaven, spooky-ass tree. I'm going to go out on a limb because hold on. The camera's being naughty. I just wanted to make sure I was in recentered mode, and it's not. You son of a bitch. Bear with me. Hi. Oh, man. Thank you. I did say something about the camera getting temperamental in the rain, didn't I? Well, now you know. Yeah, so it's like I've beaten this dead horse, like, beyond recognition, but if you allow for everything, then the things that are actually of interest get lost in the white noise. And sorry, not sorry, but that is a waste of time. You need to call the wheat from the chaff. And that's a lot of why I get grumpy when you see these things come back around, because they always will, and they always stir up the old shit. There was a time, believe it or not, when was actually an admin in the Coalition for Critical Malignant Narcissistic echo chambering, whatever you want to call it. You can tell I have a high regard for the group. And they allowed this same thin-skinned individual to come into the group, and he was mainly there just to spam the group for his Blog Talk Radio show, and we all know that Blog Talk Radio has probably the worst sound quality ever, because anyone who I've ever known that had a podcast there, at least every other show, they're like apologizing for the shitty feedback crap audio they had on their show because of the shit platform that it is. But he came on, and of course somebody inevitably brought up a certain photo from 2013, which is little more than a person in a monster suit from the Claws movie, which was like one of these really bad sci-fi channel movies that I used to like jones out on Saturday nights with a couple of adult beverages, because the movies are only appreciated under such a condition because they really are just that bad. Such titles including Mansquito, The Rock Monster, I kid you not, these are actual movies and they're bad. Abominable is one of them. And the list goes on and on. I'm not going to waste my time. The Yeti is probably the funniest one, because the Yeti costume ends up looking, after a while, like a Killer Tricks rabbit, I kid you not. Some of these movies are just like, they're bad to the point of being comically funny. You know, it's like Mountain Monsters. It's just, it's a rare, ironic bit of comedy genius. You may not have meant it to be that, but that's what you have. Oh, and the same individual, since I'm just going to rag on him apparently, the same thin-skinned individual from the upper level of the southern United States on the East Coast, among his many sins, also, I guess it's not a sin, he was good friends and endorsed this guy Trapper, who was the head guy for Mountain Monsters, and probably was endorsing this as real shit when obviously it's like live action redneck Scooby-Doo quality nonsense. Damn funny though, don't get me wrong. I saw a marathon of that at one point, and I have to say I was entertained. It is that amusingly funny. Not for reasons that are good, but when Trapper is ranting because the sheep squatch is pissed in his eye and it burns, I'm sorry, that's just comedy gold. That will never not be hysterically funny. But, you know, getting back to Mr. Henkes, you thought I forgot about you. No. According to him, Bigfoot can get COVID and blah, blah, blah. And then he, like, retracts the whole hoax the next day. He doesn't even have any staying power as a hoaxer, which is kind of sad. But rather than be, like, little Mr. Gossip today, next week, when I actually get to go into the Five Bogs area, which I was hoping to do earlier, but the Forestry Service had other ideas, and I've had it strongly hinted to me that if you are found in there prior, you might be facing a fine if you're not a resident. And as a non-resident, I don't want to pay a fine, so I'm going to be a good little monkey, and I'll wait it out until next weekend. But then once we're in there, we are going to begin with a look about the Greater Five Bogs. I will have a network member with me for at least part of the morning, and we're going to have a look about, and we'll see if there's any signs of forest-friendly nonsense going on. And from there, we will do a full assessment of the area over the next couple of weeks, because after that, the gates will open up to all the places, and then we have to check all the areas, of course, because that's how that works. And that'll carry us probably through to July. And God forbid I actually end up camping out and doing some night ops up there too. I have a standing, tentative get-together with another member of the network, which they're both residents of New Hampshire, but we end up hooking up in Vermont. Although I have gone out with one of them in an area that we know in New Hampshire as well, and I do actually have a couple of investigative areas up there I want to get to, because there are some reports out of there that at this point it's not going to be like a direct follow-up the next day, but never hurts to have a look around. That's what's on my mind right now. I am going to take a segment break to cover a little bit of ground and have a look around in here and not be distracted by banter on the video. And okay, we're back. I think you can tell by the nature of the change in scenery, we are a little bit further along, and we're in an interesting area with a lot of fallen debris and stuff. I was just up on the hill over there and trying to get a decent look at the wetland that's over there, which is a beastly little thing to try to penetrate, because once you actually get in there too, it's like just tall grass and crappy water. And is that a hole I can actually walk through? Good. And they not the easiest thing to get into. Now this right here may look like a big lump, but what's out here that's interesting sometimes are you'll have these old homesteads or whatever that are thoroughly reclaimed by nature, and that almost looks artificially kind of stacked up like it might be one, although a very ill-defined one with a tree growing out of it at this point. But I think I've mentioned in the past there's one on a trail where I do my October sojourn hike every year, and somebody finally put up a plaque, and apparently it was a shop that made cheese casks of some kind, which is interesting. I would not have guessed that. In fact, that is probably the last thing I would have thought that would have been, but come to find out, it's... So here's the interesting thing. I thought I was well off course in the bleeping wetlands right there. So basically, once again, I've walked in sort of a big loop, and then because you're not in the part of the loop where you thought, you get momentarily disoriented, and then and I had to remind myself. Last year, or actually the last week in December the year before, I got turned around in an area that I was acutely familiar with. And the reason the blame is all mine because of the familiarity versus contempt argument to be made at the time. And I am actually just getting my bearings so I can remember where I jumped over the stream. I can go back. But the thing I was kind of confronting myself with was, what did you do the last time where you messed up? Just a little further. Just a little further. Just a little further. Hey, you know what? It all looks the same now. Crap. Now what? That is exactly how that happened. Through nobody's fault but my own, because I was an arrogant little poop who thought he knew where he was, and he didn't. And I was probably going around until I found a trail that led me to a spot where I thought I was familiar. You would think I was going around in circles, but I actually had gone down the side of a small friggin' mountain, believe it or not. And when I finally realized where I was in relation to that, I have to admit, I was kind of astounded at the amount of freaking distance I had covered. Because I would not have guessed that. I'm like, no, you didn't go around in circles. You covered a lot of ground, actually. And I suddenly recognized where I am, because that leads right to the stream right there. So, fun times. I don't know if I ever mentioned this from a psychological standpoint, but there's an episode of Survivor Man before Les Stroud went down the Bigfoot rabbit hole with Fraud Standing. He was describing how you can get panicked in the woods when you realize you're lost, and there is truth in that. Not for a long time, because I eventually found the trail, and once I found the trail, you knew you're on a way. One way or another is going to lead you out. You just have to figure out where the hell you are. But for a period of about 20 minutes, I was really fighting to avoid that sense of panic, because you do start to feel it, because you don't know where you are. And you want to go home. And you don't know how long it's going to take. That is not a happy feeling. It is genuinely not a happy feeling. Although still not as bad as the time I got trapped in a work-related conveyance that takes you between floors. I'm not going to get into that because that triggers the shit out of me due to some phobias I have. You already know too much about me. We're not going to go there, so we're going to move on. I'll be damned if I'm going to have a panic attack on camera. I'm not going to edit it out. I'm just not going to let it happen. Anyway, we are going to take a segment break as I have to jump the stream and start working my way back that way. And we may or may not be back, at least for the outro, and we'll be back then.